library consultant here at the State Library. I'm joined by Jeff Regensberger, and he is also a library consultant at the State Library, and he handles our LSTA grants and things like that. Later, we're going to have our special guest from Ohio University, Greta and Camilla, who got the grant last year. They're going to tell you about their experience. So first, here's some tips. Just make sure that you are muted when you're not speaking. If you have any questions, you can put those in the chat at any time and we'll either address them if they're really relevant then or later. At the end, we will put this up as a recording on our website, which is libraryohio.gov and the Metadata Mini-Grant section, hopefully within a few days. So our goal for today is I'm going to go over a little bit about DPLA and the ODN and our metadata specifics, a little bit of an application walkthrough, some program guidelines and information shared by Jeff, and we'll have our special guest from the 2020 grant recipients from Ohio University, and we are hoping to leave some time at the end for questions. So if you haven't heard about DPLA before, DPLA stands for the Digital Public Library of America. Here is a map that shows areas covered in the United States by DPLA hubs and partners. So this means all of the states and areas that are in blue have representation in DPLA for materials. And the goal of DPLA is to be a one-stop search hub for institutions all over the country. So you can find things from really small institutions like the Pontifical College here in Ohio, which is our smallest contributor at ODN that has about 48 items. I think they have a little bit more now, but they started with only 48 items in DPLA. But if you're searching for something, and you might also find something from Harvard, and it's all located in the same place. And they want to have as much access for end users as possible. So what does that look like? Here is a search in DPLA just for all of our Ohio items. There's about a little over 3,800 right now, and you can search for anything in the collection. As you can see, there's a search box at the top. You can narrow it down by the contributor partner, which is us, the Ohio Digital Network is what I've showed you here, or any other larger hub contributor, or even further down through the contributors that contribute to them. It is free to participate. You don't have to, through the Ohio Digital Network, it is of no cost to your institution, and it only takes your metadata. It doesn't take the actual items. What you'll see here in this example is just a thumbnail image. If you clicked on that title, you would see a little bit more of that metadata, but it wouldn't put the full item there. You can put items that are in or out of copyright, just as more discoverable on your original, and then it'll link back to your original website. And it'll all share all of that information. So as you can see on the how can you use it, you could have things that can be reused, that are unlimited reuse. So those would be items in copyright, reused with conditions. There's also, if you were to scroll down, it could be an item in copyright. We do have items in the Ohio Digital Network has contributed that are fully in copyright, that are only there for research purposes, but would be great for maybe a fifth grader to discover and use or learn more about your topics. And again, all of they take is the metadata, unless you're participating in the Wikimedia project, which we're not really going to talk about today, but they only take the metadata. They don't take any rights to your materials, and they're just another way for things to be discovered. And they are trying to be really discoverable through Google as well. So they might show up in some Google search results so that your items can be more discovered. The Ohio Digital Network is the Ohio hub for getting materials into the DPLA. So the way the setup is for this is that since it would be so complicated for them to work with hundreds of different institutions, they have state hubs and a few institution hubs, but usually by states or maybe a couple of states together. And we take your metadata, we make sure that it fits their requirements, that it has everything that they need so that it appears on the website in a way that it is supposed to. And then we send it to DPLA quarterly. So every quarter we take a copy of your metadata, send it to DPLA. And again, remember, there's no cost to participate. And we have 41 institutions currently participating, and there's a list of everybody from Ohio that's contributing to DPLA through the Ohio Digital Network. And what does that look like for our participants? Oh, it went too fast. Sorry. Here are some of our usage stats over time. On the right, you can see we have been growing steadily as we've contributed more materials, but also just year by year, we have grown in what people have discovered. Obviously, in 2018, when we had our big launch and our first item of collection, we've never had that big, but everybody was going to see their items in DPLA, so it was very exciting, and that's why there's that big bump in 2018. But every year since then, we've seen some pretty steady growth, and what's interesting so far this year is that usually we do see a drop. DPLA is a huge resource for schools and some colleges. So we see a drop usually as we get into the spring months. People aren't working on as many research papers, maybe in April as they are in January. But right now we're holding steady. We'll see how that goes throughout the summer. And so far this year, we are seeing some pretty good usage on the left. So the green would be the total things that happen to records. The event items viewed would be the light blue. So that's if something is looked at in DPLA and they just look at it on the website. The click through would be when it actually clicks through to your website, your content EM or BPress. And then all of those items together are the dark, light green at the top. So what is the purpose of this grant? This grant is to help you get your collections ready for DPLA. And I think Jeff is going to take over the next slide. So here's our webpage overview. The goal of this grant is you can have a max award of $4,999. You don't have to have a local match requirement. And the goal is to help you get collections ready so that you can use this money for things like digitization costs, or several people generally use it for that staffing cost because it's expensive and time consuming to have people work on your metadata collection sometimes, and maybe we don't always have the staff to do it, but this can help be a bridge to get your collections ready. Now, it's important to remember a few things about this. We'll go over the grant page website in just a minute, but the grant page has the purpose and parameters. It's really important, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's allowed in DPLA later, but your collections do have to be something that can be put in DPLA. Pretty much anything except for newspapers can go in DPLA. So if you have a newspaper collection, please don't apply for this grant. We'll have to say, we're sorry, the end goal has to be that it goes in DPLA. When you look at our webpage, you'll also see some FAQs, which again go over the allowable costs. We're really looking for this grant to go towards things like paying a vendor to digitize or paying someone to do the metadata cleanup. And then the documents go over the application questions and the budget documents that are related to this grant. And then the last tab is where you apply for the grant. The thing about this application is you do need to apply for it in one sitting, so you need to gather all of your information ahead of time. Now we have made it very easy for you. We tell you what all the questions are before you apply and how to do it. So Jeff is going to share a little bit more.
Yeah, if just really quickly, by way of an introduction, because I feel like I'm still meeting folks here in the Ohio Library community. As Penelope said, I'm Jeff Regensberger. I'm the LSTA coordinator here, and the way I've been introducing myself, quite frankly, is to let people know that I'm the new Cindy Boyden. If you'd worked with Cindy before, gotten grants through Cindy's work here, or had questions about the LSTA program, and Cindy helped you out, I'm doing what she did now. So, in that capacity, I'm excited for the opportunity to help people through the process, and also, learn a little bit more myself along the way. To the to what Penelope had mentioned, that red link down there at the bottom of this slide, metadata mini grants, that really is the first best place to stop for this grant. The FAQs that are linked in the tab there are very, very robust. Under the documents section, you're going to find a checklist that's really, really helpful for what you're trying to do. And I would just encourage everybody to read through all of that documentation prior to even sitting down and starting to work on the proposal itself. There are a number of moving parts on this particular grant, a lot of things you'll have to have in order. And I like to kind of compare it to, um, applying for a job online where you want to just make sure you know exactly what you're going to need, you know exactly what the questions are, you know exactly what you have to go through, and then have all that stuff ready um, so that when you begin the process, you can get it all completed in, in one sitting. As Penelope described, the funds are there to help libraries with, digitization and metadata remediation and getting these collections up in a way that's accessible. The um, the award amount is $4,999, and there's no local match required for that. And if you're using a consultant or somebody for the purposes of, the project, we do ask that you uh, include and upload a CV or a resume with the application so that we have a chance to review the folks that people are looking at. I'm going to see if it'll let me. Yeah, it's letting me. Um, in terms of the timeline, one of the things that we do offer with this grant, and we try to do with most of our grants, is you can submit a draft proposal. And the deadline for the draft proposal is going to be Friday, July 7th. And if you get those to us, we can turn them around and get them back to you in time to make your revisions prior to that final um, due date of July 14th. Regarding the drafts, one of the things that I encourage people, not just for this particular grant, but with every grant, there's a saying, amongst the grant folks, if you want advice, ask for money, and if you want money, ask for advice. And the idea behind that is that the people who ask questions, who get clarification, who check on things ahead of time, who take the time to reach out and say, "What is it you're looking for? What is it you need? Does this work? Does this not work?" Those are the people who are going to be most successful when it comes to getting grant awards. So we do encourage people to submit drafts. We do encourage people to ask questions, and we do try to be the friendly face of the LSTA program here at the State Library of Ohio. So I do recommend folks reaching out. The grant project itself, the period runs October 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. And we mentioned those specifically because it's important for people to remember that the grant funds can only be spent or encumbered within that grant project period. So you can't use the grant to pay for stuff you've already done or pay for things you've already started, and you can't use that grant money to continue things on beyond the project period. So keep things within the grant terms, and um, and that's what those guidelines are for. The grant itself, 80% of that is going to be dispersed upfront on or around that October 1st, 2023 start period. And then the remaining 20% is going to be dispersed once the approval has been given for ingesting those things, and that comes later in the process. And Penelope will tell us about the metadata now.
Thanks, Jeff. I do want to add one note about the part about the CV for your consultants. We do ask you to try to have that person up front. I know some of your institutions require you to have the grant funds before you submit a job listing. So you have to know that you're getting the job listing before you get the person, or I mean, you know you have the funds before you can do that. So if that is the case for your institution and you're not able to identify someone before you submit the grant, we ask that you submit what your job listing looks like and how it is specific to your collection and explains how they're going to do this job specifically for this work. So what is the work that they need to do to get into the DPLA if you aren't already a part of it through the Ohio Digital Network? We have some resources for you about the metadata. So we have our metadata application profile, and here's a link to get to it, and our metadata manual. And those are going to be your best resources to review to make sure that your metadata meets the guidelines. For DPLA, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the metadata requirements today. We do have some other resources on our website explaining them. I'm also happy to set up a time to chat with you one-on-one to go over any questions you have about your specific instance, about your content management system, or whether your metadata is going to meet the requirements for DPLA. But I'm going to go over a few requirements very briefly. So the way that our metadata application profile is organized is into three categories of metadata elements. The first is required. These have to be in your metadata for them to end up in DPLA. And these metadata requirements need to be met for as part of the grant if you choose a collection. This means that every item needs to have a standardized right statements, URI, and what that looks like and what that means is identified in our metadata application profile, but there is a website called standardizedrightstatements.org, and there are 12 statements there, and you will need to put that in your metadata, usually in the rights field. You can still put a machine or a human readable right statement after that, but we need to have that rights link because what DPLA does is they turn it from that machine readable link into a logo. It helps that filtering that I talked about on the side, and it really helps end users know how to use your metadata. I think we've all know that in the past, a lot of institutions had very different rights statements or rights attributizations on their metadata. And it was very confusing for a school kid or even a teacher to know, well, how can we or can we not use this material? Or maybe a college student wants to attribute it or things like that. So those two things are the only two things that you have to put in your metadata yourself. The other things, such as a link where your metadata lives, if you're using a content management system with an OAI PMH stream, which we'll talk about in a minute, all the other things will be easy to find, such as the permanent link where your item lives and things like that. Now, there are two other categories of metadata, which I'm not going to go into detail with. The recommended ones, these are really good to help with discoverability. You're going to want to review them. Some of them are used in filtering, like location or subject. And so those are good to think about, making sure that do they fit the benefits of your collection? Are they going to help make your items more discoverable? And then optional, you really only need to use those if you feel like those are really important to your collection. So many of these things should already be in your metadata. I would hope most of your items, if they're online, they have a title because titles are important to finding things, but that standardized right statement is actually what a lot of people end up using this grant. They have someone add all of those into their records. So how do we harvest this information? How does your things get out of your content DM or bpress or things into our copy that gets sent to DPLA? It has to be your metadata management system has to be OAI PMH compatible. Most of the big systems like bpress or content DM already have this as a built-in feature. Some like Omeka, you have to download a plugin, so you'll want to talk to your technology people if that's something that you choose to do and how to set that up. And then what happens is after we harvest it, Peter Kukla, our great technology specialist here, does all sorts of magic to it and takes your fields and matches them to the correct fields for DPLA, and then we send a copy to DPLA. And once you get accepted for the grant, we'll talk more about the process of doing it. Or maybe you're already a DPLA participant through ODN and you're familiar with our process, so you'll just continue to do the same thing. What do you want to think about when you're choosing a metadata specialist? You want to ask questions of them. What is their experience with metadata? Are they going to pay attention to those little details? A lot of metadata is paying attention to details, especially if you're adding standardized rate statements. A lot of times the biggest error that we see is instead of adding a URI, they add a URL. If you go to the website, you'll see that there's a URI on each statement. That's what you need to copy and paste into your metadata. If you just copy and paste the URL from the top of the page, we will catch it and tell you need to go back and fix these 15 records that have the URL. Otherwise, it won't get deposited into DPLA. It will just get deleted on ingest. Another thing to really think about, and we're going to hear more from our Ohio University folks, is if you have a collection that you're not just trying to make sure that it meets the base requirements for DPLA, but you want to make it more discoverable, you want to clean up or remediate the metadata for sensitive materials or discovering underserved communities, you want to ask if they have experience with the subject matter. Maybe you're able to find someone who has studied the time and history that your metadata collection covers, and so they already have a base of knowledge that's going to help them do a better job in those descriptions or adding subject matters or subject, fields to your metadata. How will you find that person is a really big question that we get asked. Who is a good way to do this? There are some great listservs, the Ohio Dig listserv, which is listed here. Many of you might already be on it. You can also, this would be a great project for a Kent State student or any other library science student across the country, because with all of our technology today, they can work remotely. They don't have to physically be in your building. And as long as they have access to your collections through logins, they can work anywhere. So I would recommend posting the job lots of places. There's also the I Need a Library Job website, which you might all be familiar with, that's been very robust for many years. So just post it lots of places. Hopefully you'll get a big response, and be as detailed as possible about what your collection is you're hoping to fix and what experience you hope this person will have. So I'm going to go through the first few steps of the application, and then Jeff is going to explain the rest. This is what it looks like when you go to our website and you click apply. That drop-down menu has public library. It also has special library or university library. This person's name that you put at the top is really important. This is going to be the person that if you get accepted for the grant, I will be emailing about all these requirements, because that last 20% of the funds will not be able to be given to you until your metadata meets that requirement to be sent to DPLA. And I think one other part that we haven't discussed is you have to have at least one new collection in DPLA that you're adding to DPLA. It has to be a distinct standalone collection, different than other collections you've submitted before. And we want 250 new items in that collection. Now and by new, we just mean that they are not yet in DPLA. They could have lived on your website for 10 years, but they just really need to be fixed and cleaned up and made better. So, but they have to be new to DPLA. So you'll put your basic and contact information, the same with that fiscal officer. That'll be that person at your university who's responsible for your finances, and hopefully you should know who they are. And then you want to acknowledge that the amount of funds is finite and the grant review process is competitive. So obviously it'll depend on whether you meet the requirements for DPLA. That's the big one. If you try to submit with a newspaper collection, we will say no because it does not fit this grant. Or the other thing that DPLA doesn't really accept is anything behind a paywall or like thesis and dissertations. Nobody has tried to submit a thesis or dissertation collection to DPLA outside or inside of this grant. We do get a lot of questions about newspapers. So the questions that we're asking about this grant is we want to know what the current status of your collections are. Why do you need this grant to help you make them better? Whether is it digitized at all? Does it have any metadata on it? What needs to be fixed? The next question is really important. What digital asset management system your library uses? You need to make sure that this is a sustainable system, that your institution is going to continue to pay for it. So whether it's Content DM or a Mecca or any other system, do not use a trial system. Do not use anything that's going to stop working, because if you do this project, you do all this work, it gets in DPLA and you have a trial, then all these links go to nowhere. This might have already happened. So make sure that you have a digital asset management system that is paid for and is going to continue to live on for a while so that your items can be discovered through DPLA. And then what metadata schema does your institution use? So this would be whether you're using mods or I just forget. Dublin Core is obviously one of the most popular ones, and that's how Content DM is set up. We don't really care which one you're using. We just want to know so that you're thinking about it and we understand that you have some understanding of metadata. And then we would just want to, you can say you don't have a lot of quality assurance practices yet at your institution, but we're working on it and we're going to use this person to review this metadata for details. That's okay. We just want to know where things are at. And then describe how your institution is going to use this grant to help get that collection ready. How are you going to get the one collection with at least 250 records? You could have more collections, but that's your end goal. You want to submit a quote from a vendor if you're paying a vendor to digitize your materials. You want to, if you have a consultant, how much are you going to pay them per hour, how that's going to work, and then your budget. Obviously, it should all add up. And then your quote should include estimated hours of work required and the, like I said, the anticipated hourly rate. Lastly, we really want you to be thinking too about we're having lots of conversations in libraries about the significance of our collection, whether or not we're representing our constituents well, whether there are underserved communities that should be better represented in our physical and digital collections. So tell us why this collection is significant to your computer or to your institution and why this and you have chosen it for the project and who is likely to benefit from it. And then who is likely to benefit from the access to this collection? Tell us how you expect that this collection will be used once it's digitized and made better online. And lastly, how do you, your library plan to like promote this collection? Are you going to put information out in your community now that you have digitized it? Make sure that you're also going, we're going to promote it through DPLA, but maybe you're going to have a party at your library and tell everybody about this great digital collection. Now, Jeff is going to talk about some of the financial stuff.
Oh, thank you, Penelope. Yeah, this is what we're looking at now is just a continuation of the application that you're going to see. The check boxes here are fairly straightforward. You're acknowledging that the money you're requesting is for the metadata mini grant. You would be acknowledging that, as we described before, that you're not spending these funds on previous purchases, that grant funds can only be used within the grant term. Um, the consent to publicity guidelines, both the state library and the IMLS like to see the these LSTA grants and these IMLS grants uh, publicized with due credit being given to IMLS. And to help folks with that, we've linked to the state library publicity guidelines, and these will give you tips for how to get the publicity in order. Bottom one there, this could use a refresh. It's not actually called shared services anymore. It's called Ohio Pays, but the um, the idea here is the same, that you would the only way we can get people their money is by if they're set up with an account in Ohio Pays, which is what the state uses to send money to people. Just a note there to make sure that you have an Ohio Pays account. Check with your fiscal folks if you're not sure or you don't. Um, this part here is the page where you'll see the opportunity to upload the documents that are required. That's the title page and the budget form, as well as a spot there to upload any additional documentation that might go along with the grant. That could be a resume or a CV from the contractor that you might be bringing on board to do the work. It could be bid specifications, anything that might help us understand um, what you're doing and how you're doing it with additional documentation. Obviously, we use CAPTCHA to confirm that you are not a robot, and then the boilerplate title page, which helps us collect all of the information that we'll need from the principals. That's usually the project coordinator and the fiscal officer. Fairly straightforward stuff. We like to keep track of the legislatures because it's nice for us to be able to go back and show the benefits that these have in particular districts. So we ask people to fill in the U.S. House district number and the Ohio House and Senate district numbers as well. The SEPA compliance form, you're either SEPA compliant or it does not apply. And then local match funds, you can leave that as an NA simply because local match is not required for this particular grant. The budget form is a little bit more complicated or less complicated than it looks. Really, what we need here is for you to show us the amount of money in those three categories that are listed there, whether it's services, travel, or contractor slash consultant fees, the amount of money that's requested, and then use that description field to give us an idea of how you're going to spend that money, what those expenses being incurred are meant to support. And again, local match is not an issue for this one, so you don't need to put anything in there. And then just autofill the totals for the amount being requested. Application confirmation. This is the confirmation email that you will receive and notification you'll receive once you apply. The only difference between this and what you should expect is it won't have Cynthia Boyden's name on it there. It will have mine. So, but you will get a confirmation email once that application goes through. Some quick application suggestions, and these could apply to any grant that you might apply for. Read through, and I mentioned this at the start. Read through the documentation. Make sure you understand exactly what's being expected. Pull all of the documentation you'll need together so that you've got everything ready in one place. Ask us questions if you're not sure about things. Hopefully, we're doing this far enough in advance that people can start untangling some of this now. Have someone review your responses. That could be someone within your organization. We often tell people that sometimes it's good to have somebody who's not familiar with the work you're doing to take a look at your application, because if it's clear to somebody who's kind of an outsider, you can be sure that it'll be clear to the reviewers that'll be reading it. Use positive language. It's just nice to be able to see the impact that things are going to have. It's nice to be able to know, in a positive way, what's being addressed. And then, as I noted previously, avoid the jargon and the acronyms. Write as if the person reading it has little familiarity with the topic. Related, keep the project goals achievable. Don't bite off more than you can chew, and don't feel like you have to be extra ambitious just to impress us. Figure out the work you need to do, make sure it's something that you can manage, and then put it out there for us. Related, the budget, ask for what you need. We like people to spend all the money. We don't really like money left over at the end. So, don't ask for more than you might need and then have to come back and say, oh, we didn't spend all the money. Try to get that dialed in. As we noted, you've got a place in the form in the application to upload any supporting documentation, any appendices, or documents that might help us better understand what you're trying to do. Related to that, don't overwhelm us with supporting documentation, just enough that we've got an idea of what's being presented, but not more. And then obviously proofread a grant application that is well organized and well presented is easy on the reviewer's eyes. And if you're going easy on the reviewer's eyes, they generally can feel a little bit more favorably about it. So proofread and double check the details in those documents. And we're not. Let me back up. We won't go to Q&A yet because I believe our pals from Ohio University are going to be taking over. Is that right, Penelope?
That's right. I'm going to stop sharing, and then Greta should be able to share her slides, and they can tell us about their grant experience.
Yeah, thank you, Penelope and Jeff. So we presented a couple weeks ago now at the Society of Ohio Archivists annual meeting, and there is a recording of that, and it is on YouTube. So I just put that in the chat. If you're interested to see the full presentation, we're going to do kind of a briefed edited version for you today. Go into slideshow. So we worked on a Civil War letters collection, and kind of the theme of our project was to find the underrepresented in those letters. And so we had a team working on this. There was myself, I'm Greta Suter, the manuscripts archivist at Ohio University. As such, I kind of oversee the Civil War letters collection. Janet Carlton, our digital initiatives coordinator. It was basically her idea to do the grant, and also helped, a lot with the application and the whole process. Camilla Stiegel is a MSLIS student at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and she was hired to be our Civil War metadata assistant, and we're going to hear from her later today too. And then Erin Wilson, who is also working in digital initiatives at Ohio University, and she's the digital imaging specialist and lab manager, and helped us get the updated metadata into Content DM that eventually went to, is going to the DPLA. So about applying for the grant, it was a pretty straightforward kind of application process, mainly thanks to all the pre-work that had already been done thinking about this. And it started with an email from Janet and Erin asking, suggesting this project and seeing if there was interest from me. And of course, yes. So the goal was to enhance Civil War correspondence records that we already had. So things that were already digitized, that were actually ready to go to DPLA, but we just wanted to do a little bit of extra work on them first. This is also the third time applying for this grant. So we had learned some lessons and had some ideas about, what might make a compelling project. And the main goals were to make the collection easier to use and navigate, specifically for undergraduates at Ohio University. We had received faculty feedback that students were stumped by the collection. They weren't quite sure even how to browse through it, and it just seemed like there's a lack of mentions of the institution of slavery or enslaved persons, and that was something that students were looking for. And then also there was a little pilot project to start to add subject headings to this previously that happened during the pandemic. So we had that to learn from and build off of. So this is kind of a breakdown of the different sections of the grant application that Penelope talked about and how we kind of filled those. And we talked a lot about the collection itself. So for us, it was the Civil War correspondence collection, which had over 1,000 items from 12 different manuscript collections. It was already digitized, already transcribed, already in Content DM, and already had a some really basic metadata with it. For our digital asset management system and metadata standards, we do use Content DM, so that has the OAI PMH capability built in, and we knew how to use that. For metadata standards, we do kind of a combination of working with Dublin Core and then Library of Congress subject headings, and a little bit from the art and architecture thesaurus. And we knew we wanted to hire somebody, so we did include a description, a position description with the art grant package. And then we also thought maybe they might need some training with metadata. So we included that as part of the grant as well. And then we talked about the significance of the collection. So we talked about how it did represent like a broad range of people and their views and politics and interests. And then how it really it documented the effects of the Civil War on Ohio families. And that's something we wanted to stress in this kind of project, was that we were looking at enhancing the war-related things, soldier-related things, but also the family side of things and what women were doing. And then we talked about who's going to access and benefit from this work. And for us, it's going to be at a very local level, mostly Ohio University classes and archivists such as myself that are assisting these classes. A lot of times professors will come asking for material that support very specific learning outcomes. So having enhanced metadata where we can easily say, okay, where's all the examples of women on the home front? And then we know which items we can bring to classes that'll support whatever they're teaching. And then, of course, on the DPLA platform, we can reach that national, international audience and represent Ohio there. So just to say a little bit about the collection itself, there's multiple collections within the collection. So this is the Brown family collection, and it's almost 500 mostly letters, correspondence of many different members of the family here. So here's an example. This is a letter from Edwin Brown to his mother, Amira Brown. And this is an example of what all the items kind of looked like before we started this project. So we have the item itself, and then we have the transcript, and then we have some very basic um, subject headings. And so this United States History Civil War heading was kind of on all of the items. But we wanted to get a little more into what was the subject matter that the people were talking about in the letters. So within the collections, we have two collections that have to do with one's the Josiah L. Brown collection is about he was an assistant surgeon during the war, and the William Parker Johnson letters, he was a surgeon during the war. And in these two examples, we were able to really flesh out all the different things that people were talking about. So in this example, we have a letter from Emily McIntyre to Mary Brown. This is from the Brown collection. And here you can see that this is kind of what the after example. So we have a lot more named subjects. Before we only had the sender and receiver, and now we have kind of fuller agent records that have the names of people that are mentioned in the letters, as well as the sender and receiver, and then just a lot more subjects. So just by looking at these subjects, we can get a sense that, um, you know, women are represented in this letter. They're mothers of soldiers. Um, they're talking about money and economic aspects of the war. And then they're also talking about holidays. So Christmas is here, and then also specific battles. So now we have, at a glance, a much better idea of what's going on in this letter and what are some of the main things that people are talking about. So now I'm going to hand it over to Camilla to talk about the work that she did to enhance these items.
Thanks, Greta. Now I'll go into a little bit more detail about the project process overall and specific LCSH that we chose. So this is just a list of some of the resources that I used to learn about LCSH, and many of which are freely available on the Library of Congress website. So this process was done remotely. I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, and this project had a Google Drive, and on the drive we had spreadsheets with the metadata for the collections that were already in Content DM. So this included information such as the title, author, recipient, date, and it's within these spreadsheets that I input the LCSH and personal names that I chose for each of the letters. I remotely viewed the letters like any remote researcher would on their library website, and as I identified LCSH for the project, I compiled them in a Word document on my own computer, and this was what I used until the first ingest in the Content DM. Afterwards, Aaron created a CV of the headings, which was available as a spreadsheet on the Google Drive, which we could then refer to see which headings we'd already used in the past. In addition to this work, there was weekly team meetings in which we met to discuss LCSH to use in parts of the project process. We had a number of general considerations for the LCSH that we chose. Most notably is that we decided that there'd be no limit on the number of LCSH we would apply. We also chose some consistent headings to use throughout, such as the before mentioned Civil War heading, but we also used the Ohio Civil War heading. We also noted that these were soldiers from Ohio and then their regiment and company headings. Additionally, for geographic subdivisions, we opted to go to the state rather than the county level. One major exception was when soldiers mentioned which county they were from. Otherwise, we used two subject headings to refer to these topics. And because they were going into DPLA, we mostly used authorized LCSH so that they would work well with what was already in DPLA from other institutions. But some headings we did create locally, which would aid in Ohio-based research. A major focus of this work was reparative work for the histories of African Americans, women, and political history. And over the next few slides, I'll just show some of the subject headings that we chose for each of these topics. So for African American subjects, we opted for the Civil War heading with the African Americans and African American participation subdivisions. In one letter, we were even able to add United States colored troops in particular. When topics of slavery or slaves were discussed, we used the now authorized term of enslaved persons. And when there was racial language in the letters, we included racism in language and racism against Black people as content warning subject headings. But any letter that had these headings or and that language also has a content warning at the top of the letter, so any researcher knows immediately that there's this language in the letter. Additionally, African American women and African Americans were used to help bring all these letters together under general headings. For women's subjects, we opted to focus on the fact that many of these letters were written to women or from women. So to show those relationships of women towards the war, we had wives and mothers of soldiers, and then later in the war, often there were widows. But when women were discussed more generally, we used the Civil War heading with the subdivision of women, often in collaboration with a more specific heading, such as women nurses. Finally, families of and children of military personnel showed further relationships women had towards the war. For political subjects, the most prominently used heading was the Copperhead Movement, which was a faction of the Democratic Party during the war, which was prominent and heavily criticized in Southern Ohio. So that movement and its leader, Clement L. Vallandigham, show up quite a bit in the letters. So those two subject headings appear. For elections, we use both governors and presidential elections appeared, so we used those subject headings. Finally, abolitionists were mentioned in a couple letters, along with unionists who were individuals who lived in the South or border states who supported the North. We tagged them as well. Another aspect of this work was reparative naming, and this applied to women. We would add in maiden or middle names as we were able to find them on Ancestry or Find a Grave, but also in the William Parker Johnson collection, he discusses over the course of several letters to Black camp workers, Maria and Joe, and Aaron and Janet suggested to include a qualifier of their occupation to help create their personal name heading. So now researchers can use Maria Cook or Joe Aid to identify all the letters in which Maria or Joe are mentioned. The next part of this work was reparative descriptions. I wrote 14, which will serve as a model for future workers to write even more. And these are some of the resources I used for this work. And here's one major example for political aspects. You can see in the bottom here in the red rectangle that it talks about the 1863 governor's election in Ohio. I added in qualifiers of the political party affiliations of the candidates just to add in some extra context. Finally, this is what it would look like all together with the description. So this letter had a number of stories about women, so I brought that out in the description, along with providing a definition for a term he uses, butternuts. Uh, Additionally, you can see more named subjects beyond the author and recipient, and the subject LCSH, Civil War, women, and towards the bottom, the political and regiment headings. Finally, I wrote a blog post to help show that this project had been undertaken, and it can be served as a metadata guide for researchers, as I wrote about the different reparative aspects that I've discussed here. And after I gave a little story or some information about it, I included the subject headings as embedded links such that researchers can navigate directly from this blog post into Content DM and see letters that are affiliated with those subject headings. So I did that for the reparative aspects, along with some general Civil War era subject headings that would help with Civil War research, such as regiment headings. So finally, some statistics. Over 450 items have been enhanced with LCSH and will be uploaded to DPLA. We utilized over 700 different LCSHs, and we added in over 450 new personal names. There were already about 200 or so already within Content DM, and many of those have been enhanced with more names and dates. 14 reparative descriptions are now available to serve as a model for future workers, and there is now a guide for researchers to navigate LCSH and learn what an LCSH is. All of this took about 240 hours and provided priceless experience for an MSLIS student. Thank you.
Thanks, Greta and Camilla. I'm going to go ahead and share the last slide I have because it has our contact information. Oh, and it went back to the beginning. Please hold. In the meantime, you can go ahead and put any questions in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask your questions about this grant or anything else. And thanks for everybody for coming. And this will be recorded and available on our website.
Yeah, thanks, Penelope, and thanks, folks from OU. That looked like a really great project.
And you can email me or Jeff about the grant requirements. I can tell you a lot about the DPLA requirements and a lot about this specific grant, but if you have more general grant questions, Jeff would be the best contact. Or you can include us both, and then we would all be happy to answer your questions. Wait maybe one more minute and see if we have any other questions, and then I'll stop recording and everybody can have a few minutes back. We finished it all within an hour.
I just want to add something, Jan. So
Sure.
there was Greta. We did not apply for this grant previously. I wanted to, but we didn't. So that was a little.
But you are an example of an institution that has been in DPLA, but you had a new collection that you really wanted to, well, not new, but new to DPLA collection. You wanted to do some great enhancements to. So this is open to anyone, whether they're a current contributor or not yet a contributor. So
Yes, we were excited about the opportunity to do the additional deep dive into the metadata.
stop recording.